Welcome to the Subjective Professor podcast, where we reject coercion and hypocrisy. It's Tuesday, August 19th, 2025, episode 468. And just going to touch on the Trump Putin meeting once again. And we're going to talk about some other things as well. Uh, I guess in the future, I'll probably have to do an episode on the ending of World War II. Uh, on the Japan side of the war, but I totally forgot about it, and so we're just going to look ahead for next year to do it. If yeah, I should be okay and acclimated with the school year by then. Yeah, it's looking more and more that at least the first few weeks of the school year is going to be monstrously hectic. um, just learning a new system. Hopefully I'll be able to find some time to share some thoughts, keep up with the news and then make an episode. Otherwise, I'll just have to talk about personal experiences at school, which I don't want to do because I think some of my students will spread the word about this podcast, and I don't want that to happen. Anyway, so I just tried to listen to as many podcast episodes of other people today just to get a feel for what's going on in the world. I had to redecorate a classroom, and it took me the bulk of the day today, which is why I'm a lot later than I normally am in the summer. But it's interesting, and I know that most people know this, but America trying to negotiate a peace between Russia and Ukraine is kind of comical because America is basically an active participant in that war. But I think, in a way, Trump is trying to insert himself. That's kind of why he keeps saying it's Biden's war, which then qualifies him to be the negotiator between Ukraine and the US and Putin and Russia, right? So just a little thought on that. But how can uh, one side, arguably Donald Trump is part of the United States, and the United States is supplying all the weapons, intelligence, the enabling Ukraine to attack Russia in the way that they are, how can it claim to be neutral? Alex Krainer, Krainer, had a conversation with Maneco64 today, and the title of the episode was Alaska, a Big Threat to Centuries of European Colonial Power and Influence. So basically, his theory was interesting enough for me to share, interesting and different. But he made note of the people who accompanied Trump and Putin to Alaska. And he said that the military aspect of the meeting, which everyone seemed to think that that's what it was about, uh, were not there, right? So you didn't have generals, you didn't have military strategists accompanying Trump and Putin to this meeting. Instead, you had economic related characters uh, in the parties on both sides. And so his speculation was that the whole military side of it is beyond Trump's control. Like that is happening no matter what Trump and Putin will agree to. And that's because of the military industrial complex, the deep state, all of these other characters that are really running the show. They are the ones that are pushing this war, and trying to stop that is is a process. And it seems like both of them have understood this, which is why the people that they brought to the meeting, it wasn't one-sided, but both of them had similar uh, positioned people uh, to discuss economic matters, not military matters, right? So a ceasefire, all that kind of stuff, which makes me wonder, how much does Trump really know? How much is he pretending to not know, et cetera, et cetera. And which is why it becomes so difficult to speculate just exactly what he knows, what he's doing. A lot of the things that he says is definitely contrary to what might seem to be uh, moving in a direction of peace. And so Alex Krainer, his after he says that the people that were brought to the meetings were not military oriented, war related, rather economic and trade related. And he discussed how Europe and NATO is the big uh, incentivizer, motivator, enabler of the war in Ukraine, which is interesting, right? I think the United States has a lot of stake in Ukraine, but Europeans must have a lot at stake as well. And they see the world as kind of a sort of continuation of the era of colonialism. They just simply cannot let go of their former power and influence. And I'm sure that there are other contributing factors, uh, but it is interesting because if it is economic related, and why meet in Alaska? Perhaps it's the halfway point between Moscow and Washington, D.C., or because people are planning a trade route through Alaska, right, from Russia to the United States through Alaska, which I thought was kind of interesting that they would dig a tunnel connecting Asia with North America. Very interesting. Uh, Plausible, I guess. But the problem is that it cuts Europe out, right? So now Asia is directly connected with North Korea, and you don't have to go through Europe to do so. I don't know. It was an interesting enough theory that I thought I would reiterate it here. So there are a lot of people in the world today that are stuck in the past or stuck in a narrow subjectivity that Putin is evil, we're the good guys, and so we have to do everything required to bring him down, even if it means your own self-destruction, right? And so this subjectivity just does not make sense. And I struggled with it, and I might have even said it on this podcast that I just don't understand the almost willful ignorance that people have when it comes to this conflict. Dave Smith talked about how, and I think it almost was both between him and Robbie the Fire, both of them kind of were like, well, it's not Trump is actually playing 4D chess. It's just sort of accidental 4D chess, right? So he does whatever Trump does, and it sometimes works out well. And so I thought about it that what Trump always tries to do is make deals. And, all of this supposed narcissism and his desire to be successful and to be the best and all that stuff aside, he's trying to make deals, right? I think the deals are horrible deals. Nevertheless, he's trying to make deals, which in a small, narrow, strict sense is kind of like a free market mentality, right? So he's trying to do business, right? It's a horrible way, right, that he's doing it. I mean, he's trying to use force, bullying, threats, and all this other stuff for nothing, right? So anyone who tries to make a deal with Trump, what do they get in return? Not a whole lot, right? The United States can't really promise much at all. And yet Trump is trying to get everyone to make deals with him and the United States. But it's almost that because it is a deal and not a war or a bombing, not a sanction, that somehow it works out a little bit better than the doomsday forecasts, right? Because it is a little bit of freedom in there that sometimes things work out okay. So in other words, it's sort of going back, if I were to make another comparison, how did the United States become so prosperous when slavery existed in the United States? Because slavery is a horrible form of labor. It's very expensive and it drags your economy down. So how was it that America was able to become so prosperous in spite of slavery? And that's the thing. Even though you had slavery, because there was a large measure of freedom in other parts of the country, America was able to develop extremely quickly. Right. So in spite of racism, in spite of slavery, there was a lot of economic development. And as we all know, and I've discussed this before, the more there's economic development, the more difficult it is for people to control that population. And this is why there was so much wealth created in those in the late 1800s. Then Vince Lancy talked about how Trump is trying to, and Scott Bessent is trying to get everyone to invest in America. And the way that people used to do this before was by treasuries, savings bonds. And I realized that depending on the length of the savings vehicle, the debt vehicle, that the name is different, right? So there's 30-year treasuries. Then I think shorter ones are called bonds, and then still shorter ones are called notes, whatever, right? Any of these, lending money to the United States types transactions was how people would sort of indirectly invest in the United States. They would lend money to the United States, and the United States government would turn around and then spend it. And somehow that is some sort of investment into the United States. But no one wants to buy the bonds anymore. Interest rates are too low, inflation is too high. And so the new scheme is for people to buy some sort of, I don't know what they're calling it, some sort of bond, but through that, or buy treasuries, and through that, they're buying stocks. They're investing into companies in the United States. And that is how Trump is going to get people, to invest in America again, so that America can start building its industry. I'm pretty sure that Vince Lancy was sharing that, just as he was sharing that that was his strategy. Whether it would work or not is up in the air. But he did mention in passing that it was necessary, right? That probably the Treasury situation, the fact that no one is buying US Treasuries any longer, is a serious, serious problem. So trying to address that is desirable. Whether it will succeed or not is a big question. But why would any of this work? And this is, right, sort of now leaving the domain of Trump and Putin, that there's probably something more going on, more economic related than Ukraine related, right? Because the deep state is just so dead set on war in the Ukraine and expanding the war to Iran and Israel and all these other places, that there's nothing really they can discuss with that. And so they had their own conversation for their own priority, and they're keeping that under wraps, maybe, right? And as I said yesterday, part of that process was for Trump to hear that no, Russia is not losing in Ukraine. And so ceasefire, any of this stuff that would work to the benefit of NATO or Europe, Ukraine, is not on the table at all. And so people are saying that the meeting with Zelensky and European leaders yesterday with Trump was was more at the insistence of European leaders and Zelensky, not something that Trump has to really, care about. But why would any of this work? In other words, this shift in investing in stock markets versus U.S. Treasuries. I don't think it would work because the world is no longer beholden and obligated in any way to the United States. In fact, the United States is doing everything to push everyone away by its bullying, strong arm tactics, military threats and whatnot. So if your trading partner is now threatening you, do you want to still do business with that person? Right. And so all these countries are like, let's find something else. And now there is something else, since all the manufacturing from the United States has gone elsewhere. If you want the goods, if you want the computers, the TVs, the cars, then you're not going to go to America. You're going to go directly to the countries that were producing them. And so there's very little to back up America's demand and attempt to get other countries to once again invest in the United States. I hope I'm saying that clearly enough. But the reason why, there's nothing to back it up anymore, right? So the reserve currency, the dollar, it's dookie, right? It's worth nothing. The dollar has lost 99% of its value since 1971. Vince Lancy said that today. The military is extremely weak. America cannot beat Yemen, the Houthis in Yemen, people who have no high tech, but somehow it expects to beat two countries that have all of the tech and supplies all of the materials that are needed to power U.S. military. That's not going to work. The U.S. has no products to offer in exchange for all of these investments that are supposedly coming to the United States, right? Anything, America does not sell anything that is of better quality and a lower price than anywhere else in the world, right? And maybe let's just pretend something is better than anywhere else in the world. Well, they're not going to be able to buy it because it'll be a national security risk, right? They'll just sort of slap that on to prevent people from sharing technology, sharing information. Where there is some production in the United States, the prices are not competitive with the rest of the world. I mean, I forget what they were called, but you see the future of AI is billions and billions of dollars that Trump promised, and then China comes out with a $6 million like chat GBT thing, and it performed just as well, right? A fraction of the cost, and yet it performs just as well. I mean, you might say, well, it's not as good as what America has. Yeah, but it's such a low price that it doesn't really matter, right? So a lot of people will opt for the lower priced good that works almost as well as the product that that simply cannot afford. So if this is the situation that the US can no longer back up most of its threats, and even if it does carry out its threat, no one really cares, then why do we need a president for any of this? Do we really need a president to screw up our lives? Do we need a president to make it difficult to make ends meet? Do we need a president for us to be able to not plan for the future any longer, but have to live paycheck to paycheck? I mean, do we really need a president to do any of these things, right? If I had a business and I want to do business with someone else, then I just call them up and I ask them if they want to make a deal. I don't need a president to do that for me, right? In other words, are people unable to simply contact someone else somewhere else in the world and say, hey, let's make a deal? Anyone can do this. Trump does not need to do this for us. However, the government wants to be able to make those deals so that the people they want to reward, right? So that Trump has certain people in mind who needs to be rewarded for their support of him, or people who lobbied him and wants more business for themselves. He wants the business to go that way. And that's why the government is in charge of making these deals, so that certain people will be able to do business with other countries. They will be ahead of everybody else. They'll get dibs. They'll have priority. They'll have preference, and no one else will, not for a while. And so they get to make all of their money, and the rest of us, we just pound sand in the meantime. Right. So we don't need a president for this. If you want to be oppressed, that's why you have a president. If you want to be shut out of business deals, that's why you have a president. And when you do business, right, you don't need to threaten anyone. You don't need to bully, sanction, or tariff anyone. I mean, can you imagine that if you were doing business and you say to the person who's selling you stuff, I don't like how you're selling goods so cheaply to us. So you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to force ourselves to pay more and we're going to call them tariffs. No one who's doing business on by themselves are going to say that. In fact, they're going to be so happy that they found someone who is selling something so inexpensively, right? And then, if you find something that's really cheap, and instead of saying, wow, thank you for such a great deal, you say, nah, it's too cheap. I'm going to force myself to pay you more. That's just weird, right? And that is basically what we sound like to the rest of the world. And if we're not forcing ourselves to pay more, we're threatening other people, right, to give us more money or else, right? Or else we'll, do something violent to them. And the reality is that big government can only do things badly because they cannot cater to everyone's interests. They're going to cater to the rich and powerful. They're going to cater to themselves, but they cannot cater to the needs and the priorities of 350 million people who live here in the United States. They can't do that, right? You can't write a law that says, well, this person number 300 million, you get this. No, it doesn't work that way. And so trying to make it seem like you are doing things which will benefit everybody, it's going to turn out badly. And even more so because you're not really doing anything for the average person. You are catering to the rich and powerful. So any effort, anything that they do is going to turn out badly, especially lately. I said this yesterday, but to take the rules of coercion and hypocrisy seriously, you can only maximize freedom to everybody, right? And I gave that example of teaching in a classroom, right? So you can try to be all things to all men, one person at a time. But if you are running a company, if you are running a country, right, or teaching a class that have 50 people in it, how do you do that? How do you be all things to all people all at the same time, right? And the only way you can do that is by maximizing freedom for everyone, for the individual. So it's not your desires and wishes that are imposed on everybody else, but rather you teach people what freedom is, what it's like to live free, how to flex their freedom, right? That's what you teach people. That's probably what the government should be doing. Like, look, we shouldn't be in charge of this. We shouldn't be doing this. We have no business doing this. And so we're not. You have to do this. And I guarantee within minutes of that decision, of that announcement, you will have people calling other people and making deals left and right, right? Only a narcissist, only someone who is so self-centered and so condescending would believe that only they can make a deal with other people in other countries. It's just so arrogant to think that way. And so that's what I would do when I would teach. It was so enjoyable. That yeah, sure, I taught material, but I also was trying to teach people how to be free, how to be independent, not be a slave to all of the misinformation that all the other professors were, feeding them. Right? Break free. Like just say, listen, oh, okay, that's what you have. That's what you think. Okay. Like I was reading an article today about how there was a study and it said that 88% of undergrads from these two universities in Michigan or someplace like that, how they basically pretended to have political beliefs that they didn't actually have just to get a higher grade. That if they were honest with their political beliefs, they believed they would get a lower grade. And so they would just pretend to have left-leaning beliefs. How accurate is it? I don't know. But the fact that people have to pretend and cannot speak freely, this is a bad thing, right? And so instead of that, allow people the freedom of expression, especially to be able to say things which are wrong so that they can be corrected in an environment of freedom. Like you'd be able to continue to do what other people think is wrong. And then if you're successful, it turns out everyone else is wrong, or there's something to learn here, or you realize that what you did was absolutely horrible and that you were misunderstanding, or you didn't really understand what was going on, everything that you needed to understand before you made that decision. And in that kind of society, the rules of order and justice are upheld. You broke the contract, you destroyed property, you violated someone's freedom of religion, their speech, their freedom of association, right? It would be very basic. Maybe because America is so dumbed down that they don't even know what these things mean anymore, right? So you've heard my episodes on religion. Everything is religion. Green energy, that's religion. Wind power is the future, that's religion. Uh, Cervases is going to kill everyone, that's religion. The Democratic Party, that's religion. Everything is religion, right? And so, but by having a narrow definition of religion, you get to pretend that certain beliefs are not religion. And so you can impose it on everybody else, right? And so people can't see it any longer. And so they allow it to happen. They allow their freedoms to be taken away. Trump was elected on the promise that he would reduce government. At least that's what he allowed everyone to think. But government is only getting bigger, as seen by the increase in debt, which is the opposite direction, the crypto bubble inflation, right? And he can't really seem to see either the end game of that, or he's just manipulating people to make insiders make a killing, and then everyone else to be left holding the bag. Look, one can be partisan. You can love Trump or hate him for the right or wrong reasons. And the bottom line is that how one feels about Trump, right, should be equivalent to how one feels about Tom Cruise. Do you like him? Watch his movies. If you hate him, don't watch his movies, right? And that basically should be the level of influence that Trump and his behavior has on any of us. Either you like him or you don't, but who really cares? Because I get to do what I want to do in the way that I want to do it with the people that I want to do it with, right? So we should not be able to interfere with the choices and the freedom of anyone else. Freedom is the name of the game. And I know I'm going a little bit long, but just so you know that I'm not just hot air. I'm really serious about this, and I've imposed that standard on myself, right? How far are you willing to go to give other people freedom, right? To give up your control over them and to allow them freedom. So I used to be a control freak, not so much these days, but and I think I'm a control freak because I have lack self-control. But anyway, I had medical power of attorney over my brother, right? And because he was self-destructive, right? Not necessarily suicidal, but he was self-destructive. And so I was given medical power of attorney. And so basically I was in charge of his medication. And I would try to force him to take his medications. And one day, and he told me he doesn't want to take it. It makes him feel fuzzy and foggy, whatever. And one day when I took him to get his medications, he refused. And the nurse at the time said he can't give it to him because he's refusing it. And it hit me that I was forcing him to take something he did not want. Now, you might try to make an argument about his mental capacity. It doesn't matter. He didn't want it, and I basically was forcing something he did not want. Now, of course, not taking those meds, maybe it shortened his life. Who knows? Because people with his conditions, they don't live that long anyway. But it was said that for the year that after I stopped forcing him to take certain medications, that he was at his happiest. And that basically is all I can really say. So I was tested myself on this limit of freedom. How far are you willing to go? How consistent will you be? Do you really practice what you preach? And that was that big point test that I had to confront and face to see if I really believed in the principles of freedom or not. So, are you ready to go all the way, to make freedom the basis and the standard and the basic foundation of your life, right? Are you going to make exceptions? Do those exceptions affect others? Do they feel oppressed? And I'm not talking about parenting. Parenting is something different, right? But there are obviously good ways and bad ways of being a parent, being a teacher, being a pastor, whatever. But we have to examine everything, and always, always try to find something that's better. Don't get sucked in to what we're seeing now, what we're living in now, and think that this is what is normal. It is not normal. So hopefully you will be able to find ways in your own life, areas in your own life where you can open up that freedom window and show that to other people. That's it for today. I will talk to you next time.